Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the Elder Scrolls Online Tamriel Unlimited. This was developed by ZeniMax Online Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks, and first released back in 2014, and it's undergone quite a few updates since then, and now we have the Tamriel Unlimited version, which means that a subscription is no longer required to actually be able to play the game. There is an optional subscription called ESO Plus, which gives you a bunch of extra stuff, but it's not needed to actually play the game. All you need to do is buy into the game itself. And the only reason I'm really looking at this, honestly, is because I got it in a Humble Bundle. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even taken a look at this thing. I don't normally play MMOs. I don't like them. I never have. And this is really no exception. But I felt like since I was going ahead and doing all these Elder Scrolls videos for the decade anniversary of the channel, I might as well go ahead and give a quick my thoughts on video about this, just so you know where I stand on ESO and if it's something that seems to fit in well with the Elder Scrolls in general. Now, before we get too much further into this, I want to also mention that I only have the base game. I don't have the Morrowind or Somerset expansions, even though both of those are out now. In fact, the Somerset expansion just came out not long ago. And I don't have any of the DLCs either. The sum total of my experience with the game is roughly 8.5 hours, and I don't see myself playing any more of it other than simply to get footage for this video. The simple fact of the matter is that, again, I don't like MMOs. I never have, and I probably never will. I just find them incredibly boring. And ESO is no exception there. I'll try to be as objective as I can in this video, just keep that in mind as you're going forward here. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and actually talk about the game itself, and we'll go ahead and start with the presentation like we usually do. The graphics in this particular game are nothing remotely resembling impressive, even for the year they came out. In fact, they looked very dated even by the time this did release, and the years haven't really been kind to it either, particularly considering how poor the performance is. Keep in mind, I'm running an i7 4790K, 16 gigs of RAM, and a GTX 1080. My frame rate pretty much never goes above 50. And that's just absolutely insane, even for an MMO. And that's especially true when you consider the fact that the game looks like it came out even a few years before its actual release, which at this point was about 4 years ago. I mean, the texture quality is not particularly good, the modeling is only alright, and the animations are just awkward and very clunky across the board, so none of those look any good. Not to mention numerous graphical glitches all over the place, including a really nasty texture bug that I managed to capture in the footage for this particular video. So none of that really does the game any favors in terms of visuals, and it just ends up falling pretty flat for the most part. Although I will admit, the art style is a bit better than Skyrim, because at least there's something resembling color in this, and some of the environments are at least kind of interesting, because part of the game takes place in Morrowind, so of course that's going to look better than what you see in the likes of, say, Oblivion and Skyrim. That said, there's still an awful lot of brown and gray in this thing, and it also has a pretty similar art style to Skyrim, which doesn't do the game any favors, particularly with regards to the way the characters look. And then on top of that, it has an interface that is certainly functional, but it has a pretty long adjustment curve, and it just ends up being pretty unintuitive. But luckily things get a bit less messy once you move over to the sound design. Now, the soundtrack is not done by Jeremy Soule, but it is still a decent enough soundtrack, and there are quite a few callbacks to previous Elder Scrolls tracks in there, so they at least did a good enough job with that, although they definitely could have done a better job with it. And the voice acting is, well, it has the same problem that just about any other Elder Scrolls game that has voice acting does, which is that most of the characters have the same handful of voices. So even though the game is fully voiced, they get very repetitive very quickly. And to make matters worse, it is much lower quality voice acting than what you see in the main games, which I didn't think was actually possible, but it turns out it was, so it ends up being pretty wimpy as a result. Then, of course, there are the sound effects, which are mostly fairly low impact, and while they certainly get the job done, they don't get it done particularly well. You'd rather have some really powerful, punchy sound effects going on, and you just don't get those in this. So all in all, while the sound design is the stronger of the two components of the presentation overall just ends up falling pretty flat for the most part and doesn't really do the game any favors. But of course, what really matter here are story and gameplay. Now, again, I did not get particularly far into this game, so I don't really know the main storyline of the game. I just know most of the setting information, which is that the game takes place during a very chaotic period of Tamriel's history. It's between the fall of the Second Empire and the beginning of the Third Empire under Tiber Septim, which puts it roughly 800 years or so before the events of the main games in the series, at least in terms of Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind, and Oblivion, and of course about 1,000 years before the events of Skyrim. But as far as you're concerned in the game, all this really means is that there are 3 factions to choose from, all of which are vying for control of the Empire as a whole by trying to take the Ruby Throne. It is into this world that you are thrown, and you find a problem right from the beginning with regards to your character creation, because you are forced to choose which faction you want by which race you want to play. Let me rephrase that a bit so it's a bit easier to understand. So there are 3 factions in the game. You have the Ebonheart Pact, the Daggerfall Covenant, and the Aldmeri Dominion. If you pick a Nord, Dark Elf, or Argonian, then you are automatically playing as the Ebonheart Pact. You have no choice in the matter. If you pick a Breton, Orc, or Redguard, then you immediately are part of the Daggerfall Covenant, and if you pick a High Elf, a Wood Elf, or a Khajiit, then you are immediately part of the Aldmeri Dominion. There is no flexibility there. You can't pick a Nord and then play as part of the Aldmeri Dominion. The game doesn't let you do that. The only race that allows you to pick which faction you want to be part of is the Imperial race, and you have to pay extra for the Imperial race because it's a DLC. Frankly, that's pretty insulting. And things don't really look up from there either, because once you're out of the kind of insulting character creation with regards to forcing you to pick an alliance right from the get-go and locking Imperials behind DLC purchases, they throw you into a mandatory tutorial mission, which sets you up immediately as the one big damn hero who is going to save all of Tamriel from the evil Molag Bal. Now, of course, that's not how the story really works out, because you're not the only person who goes up to defeat Molag Bal. You do it with a bunch of NPCs. So, let me rephrase this for you. You're the big damn hero. All those other thousands of people running around who are told that they're the one big damn hero, no, they don't exist as far as the story is concerned. It's all on you, player one. It's insulting to your intelligence. It's also insulting to the idea of being an MMO. The entire idea of being an MMO is to be able to play the game with dozens, if not hundreds of people at once, and all of you being able to work together to meet the goals, or fight each other, or do whatever it is that MMO players do. To create a story that centers around one hero uniting Tamriel to defeat Molag Bal, and of course uniting all these different companions that will accompany you to defeat Molag Bal, is to basically say that you don't really want to make an MMO in the first place. You want to make a single-player game and then tack a bunch of multiplayer features on it. To which all I have to say is, make up your mind, because it's pretty ridiculous running around and being told that literally everything could not be done without you, because without you, the linchpin of the universe, everything would have fallen apart. Meanwhile, you have situations like what I'm showing you right now, where you were explicitly told that in order to break the siege, it has to be you that goes down and takes down all the siege engines that are attacking the city, when you go there and you find that pretty much anybody could do that, because there's only about 6 of the damn things, and only a handful of guards, when your forces outnumber them at least 2 to 1. It's just absurd. And I mean, the siege engines are so close to the walls anyway that it's a wonder that nobody just threw a couple of fireballs or just shot a couple of fire arrows at the things and just set them on fire anyway, because they could have easily done that. And just think, that's just one quest in a sea of these absurd, you are the big damn hero kind of quests that all basically have you doing everything for everybody because they're too incompetent to do it themselves. It makes you wonder how the world of Tamriel even exists. And it's not even like you're doing any interesting quests. They're all the same bog standard stuff you've seen in just about any other MMO out there, although they do occasionally sprinkle in some bits of storyline in there, or they might sprinkle in a slightly different skin on the objective than simply go here, interact with thing, or go here, kill X number of monsters, or go here, get thing, come back. You never really feel like you're doing anything heroic, and you especially don't feel like you're doing anything that requires any amount of gargantuan effort, because with the release of the 1 Tamriel update, the battle scaling that was originally applied only to areas that would be big in the Alliance War now applies to every zone in the game. What is battle scaling? It's exactly what you think it is. It's level scaling. So let's say you're way too low of a level to go into a certain area. Well, that's perfectly fine because the game will automatically scale up all of your stats and damage output and everything so that you can actually survive in that area. And then of course when you move over into another area, then the battle scaling will adapt to suit that particular area as well. Now I can't tell if that applies in the public dungeons, which are intended to be more difficult than the rest of the game, but as far as I could tell, whenever I would go to a location, I never had any trouble fighting anything that was there. Of course, even if you are the appropriate level for wherever it is you're supposed to be going, it doesn't really matter all that much because the leveling system in this game is garbage. Like in the main games, you increase your skills by going around and using them as much as you possibly can. Or at least they intend it that way. I more often than not ran into situations where my skill increases would just be completely random. I would be wandering around, not fighting anything, and then all of a sudden my one-hand and shield ability goes up by a point, and I have no idea why. And it's not even like this only happened once or twice, it happens all the time, and there is no rhyme or reason to any of your skill increases. But regardless, after a while of gaining experience points, eventually your character level will go up and you'll get access to a bunch of rewards for that particular level. After you claim the rewards, you get an attribute point which will go into one of your 3 attributes, which are stamina, magicka, and health. I'm not joking, they did the same thing that Skyrim did and reduced all the attributes down to 3, and it's just as idiotic and pointless as you see in Skyrim. Because quite literally all that does is put a few extra points into that particular pool. So if you put a point into stamina, you get a few more points of stamina. Same thing with health and magicka. That's all it does, and there's really no point to it if that's all that the leveling system's about. Of course, it also gives you a single skill point that you can put into one of your various passive or active skills, which are listed under the various skill categories. So, for example, I played a Dragon Knight, and that meant that I have the Draconic Power skill category, which gradually levels up as I use it, and I can invest my skill points into improving the various passive and active skills within that category. So I can improve the Flame Whip that it has, or the Scratching Flame Attack that it has, or something like that. The active abilities can be slotted into one of your 5 quick slots, which are in addition to your basic melee attack that can either be a quick strike, which isn't actually all that quick, or a power attack if you hold the button down. There's also the ability to hold down a button to block, and while you're holding that button, you can press the attack button in order to do a quick jab in order to knock an enemy off balance if they're preparing for a particular type of attack. But here's the problem with the way that's all set up. The combat system basically devolves into you either hammering the left mouse button in order to just continually attack things, and occasionally use your various active abilities to do actual damage, because the basic attacks do basically nothing. And whenever an enemy rears back to do a special attack, it'll show up with one of 2 auras. Either it'll be red, which means that you can interrupt it by jabbing them, or it'll be yellow, in which case you just hold the block button down, and when they hit your weapon or your shield, it will knock them off balance, and you can follow up by knocking them to the ground with a power attack, or certain abilities depending on which class you're playing. There's really not all that much in the way of strategy to the combat, and there's certainly no excitement to it because it's all very sluggish and all you're fighting are a bunch of damage sponges anyway. You might level up and see your special attack go up from about 500 damage up to 1000 damage and think, wow, that's awesome! But it's only taking a sliver of health away from an enemy when you do it. It's just annoying. It makes you feel like there's no real progression to the combat, and as a result, it just makes it insanely boring. In fact, that's just how I would describe the game in general. It's just boring. You go from point A to point B, you do a bunch of basic MMO quests that you've done dozens of times, if not hundreds of times before, depending on how many MMOs you've played before, fighting a crap ton of the same old brain-dead enemies over and over and over again, using the exact same tactics and exact same set of abilities over and over and over again. In fact, it's even in the same order that you tend to use those abilities all the time, which means that the combat just devolves into mindless tedium. And of course, this being an MMO, they've got to pad out the length by making you run everywhere you need to go. In fact, it's usually better to run than to use a mount, because the mount has its own stamina meter, which is generally less than your own stamina meter in my experience. And it's not even like you move that much faster with a mount anyway. In fact, I couldn't really tell the difference between when I was running and when I was on horseback. It was just ridiculous. And to make matters worse, there aren't very many fast travel points all over the map, and on top of having to discover those fast travel points, you have to pay gold to go between them. And keep in mind, you don't earn all that much gold anyway, so you're probably not going to be using the fast travel unless you absolutely have to, or unless you're just swimming in gold. It just seems like everything about the game is designed to drag things out to an excessive degree and make it seem like there's a lot more content than there actually is. I would be done with a city within maybe an hour. And then moving on to the next city, it would be maybe 2 hours at most, but the time in between, spent going from one point to another and spent going around collecting materials for crafting and things like that, would take another several hours. And absolutely none of it was interesting. None of it was exciting. It was all extremely boring, which is pretty much my experience with just about any other MMO out there. I have yet to find a single one that was anything other than boring, and ESO is really no exception there. There is absolutely nothing in Elder Scrolls Online that makes me want to play it over any other MMO on the market. In fact, it seems to do everything it possibly can in order to make me not want to play it. It artificially lengthens gameplay. It screws with the Elder Scrolls lore even more than it was already screwed with, and it just ends up having all kinds of performance issues, glitches, long load times, and even a very large installation size of over 81 gigabytes. And I see absolutely no reason whatsoever to recommend a game that is as thoroughly uninspired and boring as this one, especially when it takes 81 gigabytes to install the damn thing, and there's other MMOs on the market that do more interesting things. It's pretty painfully obvious that Elder Scrolls Online was little more than a cash grab trying to capitalize on the MMO craze long after it was actually relevant. MMOs are basically a dead genre at this point precisely because of crap like this. Uninspired, basically clones of other MMOs with very, very slight alterations here and there, maybe a different coat of paint, and saying, oh, well, it's totally a different game, when in fact it's not really. I mean, hell, when you get down to it, it's not even really Skyrim, but an MMO. It's just an MMO with a Skyrim skin on it. And no matter how you slice it, it's just not worth playing. So there you have it, folks, my thoughts on Elder Scrolls Online. I didn't really think I was going to be doing this video, but then I got it as part of a Humble Bundle, and I figured, why not? If I'm ever going to take another look at Elder Scrolls stuff, then I might as well go ahead and do this one. So, don't really expect MMO videos very much. I don't have very many of them. I don't like them. I never have liked them. So I just don't see the need to do videos on them very much. It's just that this was a special occasion, and I wanted to get this out as a result. So I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in later videos.